everyone, I'm Miss Mary Beth. I'm the Youth Services Librarian at Ingalls Memorial Library in Ringe, and I'm here today for Armchair Adventures. And that's our series where every day I read a little bit of a book to you, and eventually we finish a whole book. And the book we're reading right now is The Jungle Book. And this was written by Rudyard Kipling. And this one is a series of short stories, and each story was published in a magazine between 1893 and 1894. And the story we're reading right now is called Toomai of the Elephants. We started the first half yesterday, and today we're going to finish it. And it's all about this boy Toomai, who works with his father, Big Toomai, and they continue the legacy of his grandfather and his great-grandfather in taking care of the elephants. But they take care of Kala Nag, who's worked for the government. The Indian government uses elephants to do tasks for them. So Toomai takes care of Kala Nag. And where we left off was that Toomai got in trouble because he entered the elephant enclosure, and it's pretty dangerous, and he shouldn't have done that because he's small. He's 10, and that's small for all the big elephants, right? So his dad was not happy with him. And when we left off, they were on their way to a new camp. But Toomai had met Peterson Sahib, who works for the government, and he oversees all the elephants. Peterson Sahib had praised him and said he did okay, he did a good job. So our friend Toomai really liked that. And that was where we ended. And now they're going to the new camp. So let's see what happens at the end of Toomai of the Elephants. And in this way, talking and wrangling and splashing through the rivers, the group made their first march to a sort of receiving camp for the new elephants. But they lost their tempers long before they got there. Then the elephants were chained by their hind legs to their big stumps of pickets, and extra ropes were fitted to the new elephants, and the fodder was piled before them, and the hill drivers went back to Peterson Sahib through the afternoon light, telling the plains drivers to be extra careful that night, and laughing when the plain drivers asked the reason. Little Toomai attended to Kala Nag's supper, and as evening fell, he wandered through the camp, unspeakably happy, in search of a tom-tom. When an Indian child's heart is full, he does not run about and make noise in an irregular fashion. He sits down to a sort of revel, all by himself. And little Toomai had been spoken to by Peterson Sahib. If he had not found out what he wanted, I believe he would have been ill. But the sweetmeat seller in the camp lent him a little tom-tom, which is a drum beaten with the flat of the hand, and he sat down, cross-legged, before Kala Nag as the stars began to come out, with the little drum in his lap, and he thumped and he thumped and he thumped. And the more he thought of the great honor that had been done to him, the more he thumped, all alone among the elephant fodder. There was no tune and no words, but the thumping made him happy. And here's a picture of him with his little drum, his little tom-tom, and the elephants. The new elephants strained at their ropes and squealed and trumpeted from time to time. And Toomai could hear his mother in the camp hut putting his small brother to sleep with an old, old song about the great god's sheep, who once told all the animals what they should eat. It was a very soothing lullaby, and the first verse says, Shiv, who poured the harvest and made the winds to blow, sitting at the doorways of a day of long ago, gave to each his portion, food and toil and fate. From the king upon the goody to the beggar at the gate, all things made he, Shiva the preserver. Mahadeo, Mahadeo, he made all, thorn for the camel and fodder for the kine, and a mother's heart for sleepyhead, oh, little son of mine. I don't know the tune, but hopefully you got the idea. Little Toomai came in with a joyous tunka tunka tunk at the end of each verse, till he felt very sleepy and stretched himself on the fodder at Kala Nag's side. At last the elephants began to lie down one after another, as is their custom, till only Kala Nag at the right of the line was left standing up. And Toomai rocked slowly from side to side, his ears put forward to listen to the night wind as it blew slowly across the hills. The air was full of all the night noises that, taken together, make one big silence. The click of one bamboo stem against another, the rustle of something alive in the undergrowth, the scratch and squawk of a half-waked bird. Birds are awake in the night much more often than we imagine, and they listen to the fall of water ever so far away. Little Toomai slept for some time, and when he waked it was brilliant moonlight, and Kala Nag was still standing with his ears cocked. Little Toomai turned, rustling in the fodder, and watched the curve of his big back against the half the stars in heaven. And while he watched, he heard, so far away that it sounded no more than a pinhole of noise pricked through the stillness, the hoot-toot of a wild elephant. All the elephants in the line jumped up as if they had been shot, and their grunts at last waked the sleeping Manotes. Those are the elephant tamers, remember? And they came out and drove in the picket pegs with big mallets, and tightened the rope and knotted that till all was quiet. One new elephant had nearly grubbed at his picket, and Big Toomai took off Kala Nag's leg chain and shackled that elephant forefoot to hindfoot, but slipped a loop of grass string around Kala Nag's leg and told him to remember that he was tied fast. He knew that he and his father and his grandfather had done the very same thing hundreds of times before. Kala Nag did not answer to the order by gurgling, as he usually did. He stood still, looking out across the moonlight, his head a little raised and his ears spread like fans up to the great folds of the Garo hills. "Tend to him if he grows restless in the night," said Big Toomai to Little Toomai, and he went into the hut and slept. Little Toomai was just going to sleep too, when he heard the core string snap with a little ting, and Kala Nag rolled out of his pickets as slowly and as silently as a cloud rolls out of the mouth of a valley. Little Toomai pattered after him, barefooted, down the road in the moonlight, calling under his breath, "Kala Nag! Kala Nag! Take me with you, oh Kala Nag!" The elephant turned without a sound, took 3 strides back to the boy in the moonlight, put down his trunk, swung him up to his neck, and almost before Little Toomai had settled his knees, slipped into the forest. There was one blast of furious trumpeting from the lions, and then the silence shut down on everything, and Kala Nag began to move. Sometimes a tuft of high grass washed along his sides as a wave washes along the sides of a ship, and sometimes a cluster of wild pepper vines would scrape along his back, or bamboo would creak where his shoulder touched it. But between those times he moved absolutely without any sound, drifting through the thick Garo forest as though it had been smoke. He was going uphill, but though Little Toomai watched the stars in the rifts of the trees, he could not tell in what direction. Then Kala Nag reached the crest of the ascent and stopped for a minute, and Little Toomai could see the tops of the trees lying all speckled and furry under the moonlight for miles and miles, and the blue-white mist over the river and the hollow. Toomai leaned forward and looked, and he felt that the forest was awake below him, awake and alive and crowded. A big brown fruit-eating bat brushed past his ear, a porcupine's quills rattled in the thicket, and then in the darkness between the tree stems he heard a hog-bear digging hard in the moist, warm earth, and snuffling as it digged. Then the branches closed over his head again, and Kala Nag began to go down into the valley, not quietly this time, but as a runaway gun goes down a steep bank, in one rush. The huge limb moved as steadily as pistons, 8 feet to each stride, and the wrinkled skin of the elbow points rustled. The undergrowth on either side of him rippled with a noise like torn canvas, and the saplings that he heaved away right and left with his shoulders sprang back again and banged him on the flank, and great trails of creepers, all matted together, hung from his tusks as he threw his head from side to side and plowed out his pathway. Then Little Toomai laid himself down close to the great neck lest a swinging branch should sweep him to the ground, and he wished that he were back on the lines again. The grass began to get squashy, and Kala Nag's feet sucked and squelched as he put them down, and the night mist at the bottom of the valley chilled Little Toomai. There was a splash and a trample, and a rush of running water, and Kala Nag strode through the bed of a river, feeling his way at each step. Above the noise of the water, as it swirled round the elephant's legs, Little Toomai could hear more splashing and some trumpeting both upstream and down, great grunts and angry snortings, and all the mist about him seemed to be full of rolling, wavy shadows. "Aye," he said, half aloud, his teeth chattering, "the elephant folk are out tonight. It is the dance, then." Kala Nag swashed out of the water, blew his trunk clear, and began another climb. But this time he was not alone, and he had not to make his path. That was made already, 6 feet wide, in front of him, where the bent jungle grass was trying to recover itself and stand up. Many elephants must have gone that way only a few minutes before. Little Toomai looked back, and behind him a great wild tusker with his little pig's eyes glowing like hot coals was just lifting himself out of the misty river. Then the trees closed up again, and they went on, with trumpetings and crashing and the sounds of breaking branches on every side of them. At last, Kala Nag stood between 2 tall tree trunks, at the very top of the hill. They were part of a circle of trees that grew round in a regular space of some 3 or 4 acres, and in all that space, as Little Toomai could see, the ground had been trampled down as hard as a brick floor. Some trees grew in the center of the clearing, but their bark was rubbed away, and the white wood beneath showed all shiny and polished in the patches of moonlight. There were creepers hanging from the upper branches, and the bells of the flowers of the creepers, great waxy white things like convoluses, hung down fast asleep. But within the limits of the clearing there was not a single blade of green, nothing but the trampled earth. The moonlight showed it all iron gray, except where some elephants stood upon it, and their shadows were inky black. Little Toomai looked, holding his breath, with his eyes staring out of his head, and as he looked, more and more and more elephants swung out into the open from between the tree trunks. Little Toomai could only count up to 10, and he counted again and again on his fingers till he lost count of the 10s, and his head began to swim. Outside of the clearing he could hear them crashing in the undergrowth as they worked their way up the hillside, but as soon as they were within the circle of the tree trunks, they moved like ghosts. They were white tusks, wild males, with fallen leaves and nuts and twigs lying in the wrinkles of their necks and in the folds of their ears. They were fat, slow-footed she-elephants with restless little pinky black calves, only 3 or 4 feet high, running under their stomachs. They were young elephants with their tusks just beginning to show, and they were very proud of them. There were lanky, scraggly, old-maid elephants, with their hollow, anxious faces, and trunks like rough bark. There were savage old bull elephants, scarred from shoulder to flank with great wheals and cuts of bygone fights, and the caked dirt of their solitary mud baths dropping from their shoulders. And there was one with a broken tusk and the marks of the full stroke, the terrible drawing scrape of a tiger's claws on its side. They were standing head to head, or walking to and fro across the ground in couples, or rocking away and swaying all by themselves, scores and scores of elephants. Toomai knew so long as he lay on Kala Nag's neck, nothing would happen to him. For even in the rush and scramble of a kidda drive, a wild elephant does not reach up with his trunk and drag a man off the neck of a tame elephant. And these elephants were not thinking of men that night. Once they started and put their ears forward when they heard the clinking of a leg in the iron in the forest. But it was Pudmini, Peterson Sahib's pet elephant. Her chain snapped short off, grunting and snuffling up the hillside. Pudmini must have broken her pickets and come straight from Peterson Sahib's camp. Whew! And little Toomai saw another elephant, when he did not know, with deep rope galls on his back and chest. He too must have run away from some camp in the hills about. At last there was no more sound of any elephants moving in the forest, and Kala Nag rolled out from his station between the trees and went to the middle of the crowd, clucking and gurgling, and all the elephants began to talk in their own tongue and to move about. Still lying down, little Toomai looked down upon scores and scores of broad backs and wagging ears and tossing trunks and little rolling eyes. Toomai heard the click of tusks as they crossed other tusks by accident, and he heard the dry rustle of trunks twined together, and the chafing of enormous sides and shoulders in the crowd, and the incessant flick and hiss of great tails. Then a cloud came over the moon, and he sat back in darkness. But the quiet, steady hustling and pushing and gurgling went on just the same. He knew that there were elephants all around Kala Nag, and that there was no chance of backing out of the assembly, so he set his teeth and shivered. In a keda, at least, there was torchlight and shouting, but here he was all alone in the dark, and once a trunk came up and touched him on the knee. Then an elephant trumpeted, and they all took it up for 5 or 10 terrible seconds. The dew from the trees above spattered down like rain on the unseen backs. And a dull, booming noise began, not very loud at first, and little Toomai could not tell what it was, but it grew and it grew. And Kala Nag lifted up one forefoot, then the other, and brought them down on the ground, 1, 2, 1, 2, as steadily as trip hammers. The elephants were stamping all together now, and it sounded like a war drum beaten at the mouth of a cave. The dew fell from the trees till there was no more left to fall, and the booming went on, and the ground rocked and shivered, and little Toomai put his hands up to his ears to shut out the sound. But it was one gigantic jar that ran through him, the stamp of hundreds of heavy feet on the raw earth. Once or twice Toomai could feel Kala Nag and the others surge forward a few strides, and the thumping would change to the crushing sound of green things being bruised. But in a minute or two the boom of feet on hard earth began again. A tree was creaking and groaning somewhere near him. He put out his arm and felt the bark, but Kala Nag moved forward, still tramping, and he could not tell where he was in the clearing. There was no sound from the elephants, except one, when 2 or 3 little calves squeaked together. Then he heard a thump and a shuffle, and the booming went on. It must have lasted fully 2 hours. and little Toomai ached in every nerve, but he knew by the smell of the night air that the dawn was coming. The morning broke in one sheet of pale yellow behind the green hills, and the booming stopped with the first ray, as though the light had been in order. Before little Toomai had got the ringing out of his head, before he had even shifted his position, there was not an elephant in sight except Kala Nag, Pudmini, and the elephant with the rope galls. And there was neither sign, nor rustle, nor whisper down the hillside to show where the others had gone. Little Toomai stared again and again. The clearing, as he remembered it, had grown in the night. More trees stood in the middle of it, but undergrowth and the jungle grass at the sides had been rolled back. Little Toomai stared once more. Now he understood the trampling. The elephants had stamped out more room, had stamped the thick grass and juicy cane to trash, the trash into slivers, the slivers into tiny fibers, and the fibers into the hard earth. "Wah!" said little Toomai, and his eyes were very heavy. "Kala Nag, my lord, let us keep by Pudmini and go to Peterson Sahib's camp, or I shall drop from thy neck." The third elephant watched the two go away. He snorted, wheeled around, and he took his own path. He may have belonged to some little native king's establishment 50 or 60 or 100 miles away. 2 hours later, as Peterson Sahib was eating early breakfast, his elephants, who had been double-chained that night, began to trumpet, and Pudmini, marred to the shoulders with Kala Nag, very footsore, shambled into the camp. Little Toomai's face was grey and pinched, and his hair was full of leaves and drenched with dew. But he tried to salute Peterson Sahib, and cried faintly, "The dance! The elephant dance! I have seen it!" As Kala Nag sat down, Toomai slid off his neck in a dead faint. But, since native children have no nerves worth speaking of, in 2 hours he was lying very contentedly in Peterson Sahib's hammock, with Peterson Sahib's soothing coat under his head, and a glass of warm milk, a little brandy, inside of him, and while the old, hairy, scarred hunters of the jungles sat 3 deep before him, looking at him as though he were a spirit, he told his tale in short words, as a child will, and he ended up with, "Now, if I lie in one word, send men to see, and they will find that the elephant folk had trampled down more room in their dance room, and they will find 10 and 10, and many times 10, tracks leading to that dance room. They have made more room with their feet. I have seen it. Kala Nag took me, and I saw. Also, Kala Nag is very leg-weary." Little Toomai lay back and slept all through the long afternoon and into the twilight, and while he slept, Peterson Sahib and Makula Appa followed the track of the 2 elephants for 15 miles across the hills. Peterson Sahib had spent 18 years catching elephants, and he had only once before found such a dance place. Makula Appa had no need to look twice at the clearing to see what had been done here, or to scratch with his toe in the packed, rammed earth. "The child speaks truth," said he. "All this was done last night, and I have counted 70 tracks crossing the river. See, Sahib, where Pudmini's leg iron cut the bark of that tree? Yes, she was there too." They looked at one another up and down, and they wondered. For the ways of elephants are beyond the wit of any man to fathom. 40 years and 5, said Maka'apa, have I followed my lord, the elephant, but I have never heard that any child of man had seen what this child had seen. By all the gods of the hills, it is. What can we say? He shook his head. When they got back to camp, it was time for the evening meal. Peterson Sahib ate alone in his tent, but he gave orders that the camp should have 2 sheep and some fowl, as well as a double ration of flour and rice and salt, for he knew that there would be a feast. Big Toomai had come up from hot foot from the camp in the plains to search for his son and his elephant. Now he had found them, he looked at them as though he were afraid of them both. And there was a feast by the blazing campfires in front of the lines of picketed elephants, and little Toomai was the hero of it all. And the big brown elephant catchers, the trackers and drivers and ropers, and the men who knew all the secrets of breaking the wildest elephants, passed him from one to the other, as they marked his forehead with blood from the breast of a newly killed bird, to show that he was a forester, initiated and free of all the jungles. And at last, when the flames died down and the red light of the logs made the elephants look as though they had been dipped in blood too, Macha'apa, the head of all the drivers of the Kiddas, Macha'apa, Peterson Sahib's other self, who had never seen a maid road in 40 years, Macha'apa, who was so great that he had no other name than Macha'apa, leapt to his feet, with little Toomai held high in the air above his head, and shouted, "Listen, my brothers! Listen too, my lords in the lines, for I, Macha'apa, am speaking! This little one shall no more be called little Toomai, but Toomai of the elephants, as his great-grandfather was called before him. What never man has seen, he has seen through the long night. And the favor of the elephant folk and the gods of the jungles is with him. He shall become a great tracker. He shall become greater than I, even I, Macha'apa. He shall follow the new trail, and the stale trail, and the mixed trail with a clear eye. He shall take no harm in the Keda when he runs under their bellies to rope the wild tuskers. And if he slips before the feet of a charging bull elephant, the bull elephant shall know who he is and shall not crush him. Ahai, my lords in the chains! Here is the little one that has seen your dances in your hidden places, the sight that never man saw. Give him honor, my lord elephants. Salam Karo, my children. Make your salute to Toomai of the elephants. Gonga Pashad, Hujagug, Bushagug, Kujargug, Pudmini. Thou hast seen him at the dance, and thou too, Kalanog, my pearl among elephants. Together, to Toomai of the elements. Bravo! And at that last wild yell, the whole line flung up their trunks till the tips touched their foreheads, and they broke out into the full salute, the crashing trumpet peal that only the Viceroy of India hears, the salamut of the Keda of the elephants. But it was all for the sake of little Toomai, who had seen what never man had seen before, the dance of the elephants at night and alone in the heart of the Garo Hills. And that is the end of Toomai of the elephants. What do you think? He witnessed something pretty amazing. Do you think they really do that? Elephants are very smart creatures. They're very smart animals. So that would be pretty amazing to witness, don't you think? I'm glad Toomai got the respect of the elders. Thanks for reading about Toomai of the elephants with me. Join me on Tuesday for Servants of the Queen, the last short story in the Jungle Book. Then we will have read the whole thing. Thanks for reading with me. Have a fun weekend.